I want to pick up a few points here. Nigel H. says Starmer comes across as a dithering donkey when it comes to Diane Abbott. I'm afraid so. And Thomas Bradley says undergraduate days recall Nostradamus having scratched his quatrains in French or perhaps occasional Latin lapse. However, Nostradamus was remarkably prescient at times, such as the prediction of Louis' death and the flight to Varennes, so cannot be dismissed out of hand. A casual skip search for said Charles quatrain within applicable century failed to find any verified citation of only vague toss. What with the king's illness, William gone missing for his godfather's memorial service, Thomas Kensington's violent death, blah, blah, blah. Yes, absolutely. I entirely agree. The problem with the quatrains is they're not there, and the red tops only quote the interpretations. They don't quote the quatrains themselves. Wooden Tie says, when I was younger, I was into all that was God a spaceman, Nostradamus stuff. In other words, von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods and so on. And I was sure I found a quatrain saying the world was going to be destroyed by nuclear weapons in the very near future, and wondered why everyone else had missed it. It didn't happen, and as you suggest, the work, as well as being at the mercy of dodgy translations, is so open to whatever the interpreter imagines fits the event. Absolutely. As with most apocalyptic literature and a lot of prophecies, it's all open to interpretation. The apocalypse itself, the book of Revelation, belongs to a genre of biblical and esoteric writings that are extra biblical as well and have continued, where the future tense is used as a way of talking about the present, as an elliptical way of referring to the present. So, talking about the Antichrist, that's more likely to be Nero than it is to be some figure from the present day. And the apocalypse simply means to unveil, to uncover, to expose the role of the supernatural in our own lives. And that's now. And when you go back to the apocalyptic utterances of Christ within the gospel stories, it's about the ambivalence of the tense. It's about what will come is now. The kingdom is among you, that sort of thing. And that is using this language of the unveiling, this language of the apocalypse. People who have predicted precise futures are fools, and they've generally been found wrong. Whether these are the Qumran community, various eschatological sects, various millennium sects in the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, or whether some of the more modern traditions like Jehovah's Witnesses, who at various times in their development have predicted various events, the end of times and so on. It hasn't happened. And you can turn around quite confidently say, well, that's because we were praying. You can also turn around, if you wish to be unkind, and say, well, that's because you were wrong. But the apocalypse is about changing the way we think rather than what is going to happen. And as for somebody crystal ball gazing, people are capable of seeing beyond the present time. Time is an illusion anyway. People are capable of seeing patterns in reality. But these are not certain. They require interpretation. And the interpretation is often within a cultural milieu. The War Scroll, the New Jerusalem, a lot of this is poetic language, and it's very dodgy, which is why a lot of the more apocalyptic, more esoteric, more eschatological books, which are clearly part of that biblical collection, have not made it into the recognized biblical canon. The Testament of Abraham, the Apocalypse of Zephaniah, the Testament of Moses, and so on. These are the animal apocalypse, one Enoch. There are so many, and when you then go into the visions of the saints in the Catholic and the Orthodox churches, or even the holy people in particularly some of the Islamic traditions, the whirling dervishes and people who suffered, who were killed for their outrageous statements. Because it's very difficult to define the mystical, because the whole point about a vision of the supernatural is that it is a vision beyond our experience. And therefore it's very difficult to define. Our brains continue working when we are asleep. And when we are anxious about something. So I'm sure many of you who are in the middle of exams are waking up having dreams that you've gone into the wrong exam, or that you've studied the wrong subject for the exam, and suddenly you're forced to do an exam in a subject you've never studied at all. That's a typical exam dream. Actors have the dream of going on stage and having to perform in a play they've never rehearsed. It's the same dream. But what does it mean? It means that our brain never really switches off, even when we're asleep, and it's still processing information, and it's trying to reassure us that it's doing the job. And when we wake up, we get sort of remnants of this rubbish left behind as memories of what we were doing while we were asleep, and it worries us. And we think, no, I just had this horrible dream. You didn't really. Your brain was just working very hard trying to process your anxiety. And anxiety is not the future. Anxiety is about the present. And a lot of the attempts to interpret the mystical are attempts to interpret anxiety, attempts to interpret the awe of coming face to face with what is not human, with what is outside our experience. And therefore, what we cannot fully articulate, what we cannot fully remember. We remember symbols and what we write, or what the biblical writers, what the saints write, is a series of stories and images and symbols, rather than a direct record of what happened, because it's beyond explanation, it's beyond experience, metaphysical. And some of the language, therefore, is great poetry, and some of the language is pure drivel. It doesn't diminish the experience, but it certainly doesn't mean that experience is something that we can rely on. And I would put Nostradamus in that context. I don't believe he was a fake, but equally I don't believe that he really understood what he was doing and was able to articulate that. And whatever visions he had by gazing into water probably will only make sense with hindsight. And it's quite possible, as with the other apocalyptic writings, that the writings of Nostradamus have multiple applications. And why should that be true? Well, if we are in touch with an out-of-time vision, that's the point. It's out of time. It's beyond time. It's beyond place. It's beyond specifics. And it can be applied to many situations. What God does is eternal, so he's always doing it. And when we have apprehension of the eternal, of the non-time, we're looking at something that is always happening. So yes, you've got a story which may well relate to King Edward VIII, who abdicated. It may relate also to King Charles III, who is ill. It may not. But I think for people to be running around with the red top saying, this is what is going to happen in 2024, what utter piffle. Piffle.